Okay, let's get started. So this is called How to Find Off-Market Property. My name is Mathew Frederick, and you can always reach me at mathew.f at rccsol.com, 289-440-2335. My work history started when I was 16 years old as a soldier in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserve. That was important because I learned leadership, and I use that leadership today when I'm actually talking to property owners. I also learned something called situation awareness, meaning I'm able to understand what's happening in my surrounding. And that was very critical when it comes to analyzing property and talking to people and seeing how real estate actually affects the neighborhood. The next thing I did was, as I was in the military part-time, I started working for the Bank of Montreal. That was a great job. I enjoyed it, but I was a programmer and I hated programming. When I was about 20 years old, 22, I thought to myself, I'm sitting at the young people's table, and all I'm going to do for the next few years, over the next 20 years, is move from the young table to the old table. And I thought I can see my entire life. It's like a book. Didn't want to do that. So I left a really great job at the Bank of Montreal at their head office, and I went to IBM. Now, IBM was really good because I got the chance to work inside and outside. Whereas as a programmer for the Bank of Montreal, I was stuck in a little cubicle. As I was working outside, I realized that I loved the teaching aspect of setting up computers, and that took me towards training. In other words, I became a teacher, and for a decade, I taught computers. I realized at IBM that I was pretty much in an advanced form of slavery, which means I was getting $130 an hour, $30 for me, $100 for the company. Didn't really like that. When I switched to teaching, I realized it was my passion, but I was making probably $80K a year. But at my real job, which I call my real estate investing, I was making double that. And what I did was I left that. The problem with leaving that is just because I was making more money, I left my passion. Later on in life, I realized, you know what? I do still want to teach. I do still want to coach. Now, when I was doing these jobs, I thought maybe I'll get into autonomous business. Autonomous meaning businesses that I don't have to be there. And I thought real estate investing was autonomous also. And it's not. I thought if you bought a house, you bought a building, it takes care of itself. You don't have to do a whole lot. Well, I learned that lesson pretty quickly when I bought bank machines. So I used to have ATM machines about 20 years ago, and having less than 4 or 5 means you got to fill them up yourself. So even though it looked pretty good on paper, when you put these things in the sketchy neighborhoods where they work the best, and you have to have $20,000 in your shirt, and you run to the store and you put that in there, that's pretty dangerous. I also had a car wash, like where somebody actually hand washes their car. I'm thinking this is a great business, autonomous. I don't have to be there. But again, like with the bank machines, people would do crazy things. Put quarters into the system to jam up the actual system so it won't work for half a day. Pull the wands out of the wall, hit the medium between the two stalls. So all of a sudden I'm realizing, wait a second, you know what? You have to be there to actually make money. Now I got into joint venturing. And today I joint venture with buildings, and I think multifamily, it's one of the best places to joint venture. Sometimes your first might be your own, and you realize, okay, you know what? I can only buy one. What if you want to buy 5 more? And where I first saw joint venturing is when I started a restaurant with a partner. It's a Thai food restaurant where I put half the money in. She put in half the money, but she was there 90% of the time. I got to work at my job. That was her job. And she had a vested interest in success. So that's when I began to see joint venturing. My next 3 businesses, the pool company, the colonics business, the wellness center, senior day center, I put all the money in, and I had employees work there. I found that I needed somebody with a vested interest working there to look out for my best interest. So therefore, I brought on a partner. And I tell you this because a lot of people have a hard time with the concept of how could somebody put all the money into the system? How can they put the down payment, the closing costs, the mortgage to buy a building, then give me half? Who would ever do that? In most cases, you're like, I would never do that. But the number one lesson you have to learn about real estate, if you're going to the next level, is that you don't see the world the way it is. You see the world the way you are. Just because you would not do that, you cannot superimpose that onto somebody else. Because for me, it was clear that to have 4 businesses, I had to put the money into it, and I had to have somebody at each business who had a vested interest, and I gave them half of everything. I gave them half because that was their main job, and it allowed me to be somewhere else, doing my thing, working, along the way. And that's the same concept I always use when I convince people to bring money to the table. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next, I want to talk a bit about one of the most misleading statements that you hear when it comes to real estate training. And that is, if you follow my system, you will be successful. That is actually not true. If you follow somebody's system, if this is a system and these noodles are a system, it doesn't mean I'm going to be Justin Timberlake just because I have that system. You literally have to apply the system in order to work. Let me just check this comment. Did the active partner get paid for their time? The active partner actually was getting paid 50% of all the profits. In other words, they would get paid first. If there's anything left over, I ended up getting above and beyond that. So if a check came in for $1,000, let's say that was our profit, they would be taken care of first, 50%. And then perhaps if it was $600, 600, I would get the extra 100. If it was 700, I would get the extra 2. That's how we did that. But the important thing about that is it's that somebody else was actually doing the work while I had invested the money, and I ended up giving them half of everything, which allowed me to free my time up so I can be the best that I can be. So just going back to this, here's the one thing that people have to understand about investing and about this concept about if I show you a system, you can do it too. The fact is, people have to do things they dislike. Now, a lot of people, when I was a teacher, would say to me, I hate math. Why did we learn math in high school? All the stuff we learned was useless. You have to remember something. The way you learned it and what you learned was to develop a certain quadrant in your mind. When you learn music, you develop a certain quadrant. When you learn science, you do the exact same thing. And I believe that learning things that you don't want to learn helps you to complete that picture. And that picture is really important because as an investor, there are things that I do all the time that people say to me they hate doing, but it is at the core of being successful when it comes to multifamily. Example, people hate making phone calls. They hate talking to owners. They hate talking to property managers. They even hate door knocking and talking to people that they don't know. They hate talking to strangers. They even hate going to events and talking to strangers to try to meet people who may end up JVing with them. And they always say to me, can I get around that somehow? The bottom line is you can't. If I show you a tennis racket and how to use it, and I say to you, you have to use all 5 fingers, if you don't have a thumb, the system is not going to work the same. So what do? You have to grow a thumb, or you have to literally figure some way to compensate for that. And again, that's really, really important because there's so many things that I don't want to do that I end up having to do required for me to actually do business in the multifamily world. Now, what I'm going to do is spend about 2 minutes in some of my real estate history. And what you see on the screen right now, these are some houses that I used to own in the past. In fact, everything on the screen I no longer own. I have about 3 screens worth of these, but so I've done the 2 to 4 unit properties, which was great. I've bought in Cape Coral, Florida, back in 1998. These houses were built. I paid for them to be built. And this is great stuff because they have canals behind them. And with the canals, you end up having alligators. So ultimately, you still need a pool and a lanai. You go swimming here, something might spin you. So ultimately, it's a nice scenario. And I rent these to families, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. Back in 2001, some of my experience is I ended up buying 5 cottages. And with these cottages, I ended up renting them out. And it was great at the time. Now, today, it's much easier. It's much better because you have Airbnb, you have e-transfers, you have a whole lot of stuff we didn't have back then, but we still made it work. Today, people who are investing have a lot more stuff, but they complain. So it's important to be an investor who complains less, not saying anybody out there complains, but just saying complain less and do more. Today, I've sold most of these cottages. This was Salerno Lake, Billings Lake, Nagati Lake, Irondale, Billings, and Little Bob. I kind of wish I kept them. Back in 2008, when the market fell in the US, I bought 3 houses in Arizona. And the concept for this is simply executive homes for companies. So I rent these for about $4,500 a month to a corporation on a 2-year lease, and they bring their executives into town and they stay here. And I provide the cleaning, I provide the cook, I provide the trainer, I provide the driver. These are all local businesses. So I packaged it together and created something more useful for a corporation where they signed up for 2 years at a time. I've also been a builder. I've built small subdivisions, 31 to 40 house subdivisions. And just briefly, what I do is I tend to build what's called semi-detached. They have one roof and they have one basement and one common wall, which I think is much easier to build, much smarter. And the largest I've ever built was in 2010, 113 house subdivision. Also, I've built some buildings, 3-story buildings, as well as I do some stuff in Belize. So that wraps around some of my investing history, which this shows you why I'm actually here talking to you. Why Belize? Well, where is Belize? Belize is right below Mexico. Look at that water. Think about walking in that water. What we do down there is we build 3-story houses that are 3 units. So the first and second unit, full-time rental to expatriates, people who are retiring here from England or Australia. And the third floor would be Airbnb, which means we could use it ourselves or we can generate more money. Good news is we don't have to have a down season because we have people who are there full-time who look after the property. So that's an example of a property that we just built. And that's a little bit of my history and my background, which I've just covered. Now, what I'm going to do is cover with you guys why multiple family, why people do it. I'm going to talk about how I analyze a deal, which means I'll talk about a few numbers. Then we'll look at 3 deals that are currently active right now. I'll show you my system for finding properties. Then I'll talk about how I talk to owners. And for this section, what I've done, I've just recorded a 3-minute conversation with the property owner. And later on, I've had my assistant call him back and say, can we use this as a training tool? And he said yes. And of course, we deleted his name and the addresses. So this is an actual call where I'm actually talking to somebody, and I'll break it down for you. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit about how I structure a joint venture. Then if we have some time after, we'll answer some questions. Now, if you don't get your questions answered, make sure you write them down anyway, and make sure you send them to me, and I'll make sure I get those back to you. Now, okay, so why multifamily? How do I see it? What am I thinking in going into multifamily? Well, let's say you had a duplex, a house, and let's say it's about $500,000. Now, you can get houses for this much money, but you have to go kind of far for it. It's not going to happen downtown Toronto. But I'm just going to use a simple number for teaching purposes. And let's say you had a house, it's a duplex, it's $500,000, and your cash flow is $500. Now, that's okay, but you can't live in $500 a month. So therefore, a lot of people will say they want at least to make about $6,000. If you make $6,000 a month, that begins to put a dent in your livelihood. But you know, people always say they don't want to get into commercial real estate or multifamily because it's expensive. But is it really? Let's take a look at this. To get to 6,000, you have to buy 12 houses. Well, 12 houses, it's about $6 million. So it's not cheap. And obviously you buy it over time. When you look at the multifamily world, yeah, it's more expensive. It's $2.5 million. But a good property can generate you $3,000 cash flow. Now, some of you are saying, when was the last time you saw a multifamily building producing $3,000 cash flow? I'll show you one that's current right after I finish this section. Now, 2 of those will get you to $6,000. Now you have to ask yourself, hold on one sec. If 2 of those are $5 million and 12 of these are $6 million, is it more expensive to actually become successful with multifamily? Now, granted, it is harder to get 2.5 million. And just because it's hard, let's go back to my example with the tennis racket. Just because there's no thumb doesn't mean you have to not have one. You can grow one. It's hard to find people who have that kind of money, but if you do the right process and with the right training, you can find people who will buy those buildings. I'll talk about that later on today when I'm talking about how do I talk to a doctor, okay? But again, it means it's difficult, but you have to do it anyway in order to be able to get to where you want to go. Now, why would somebody want multifamily as opposed to, let's say, a duplex or single family home? Well, they're purpose built, which means they're stronger. They're like Jeeps. And instead of having 12 roofs, you're probably better off with 2 roofs. 12 locations, you're better off with 2 locations. 12 mortgages, better off with 2 mortgages. These properties are property managed because they're larger, they make more money, so less work for you, greater cash flow, and they go up in value over time. So that's the logic behind why I would look at multifamily. Now, I do have to spend about 5-6 minutes on some numbers because when I'm looking at a property, what do I see? It's important to understand that I do not look at 50 numbers. In fact, when I look at my dashboard in my car, I'm not looking for 50 dials. I look at about 4 to 5 numbers, and if those numbers make sense, if they actually work, then maybe it's worth checking this property out. So what I'm going to do is go through some of the key numbers that I think you need to know when you do a quick analysis. Just like a dashboard, you'll notice all you need is your speedometer. That's important. You'll need your gas gauge. That's important too. In this case here, I'll talk a bit about net operating income. I'll talk about something called cap rate. People get this stuff confused, cap rate. So I'm going to show you how there's cap rate, the property, how there's cap rate, the area, and how the property cap rate and the area cap rate come together. Also, we'll talk a bit about cash flow and price per unit. So let me run through that. So quickly, what is the NOI? The NOI is really revenue and expense. In fact, this is how we measure the quality of a multifamily building. If you told me building A has a cash flow of $2,000, building B has a cash flow of $3,000, it doesn't mean much to me because the cash flow depends not just on revenue and expense, but the size of the mortgage. If there's no mortgage, the cash flow is huge. So we judge buildings based on revenue minus expense. And let's say the revenue was about $120,000 and the property taxes was about $18,000 and the maintenance was about $27,000. For those of you who are newer, when I say maintenance, this is what I mean. I mean heat and power, heat and hydro, water, who pays that? I would prefer not to pay the power. I would prefer to have my units metered if possible. Sometimes you're stuck. You have a boiler and you have to pay the heat and you're stuck with the water. But if I can pass on the power, that would be great. Repairs and maintenance, small repairs and maintenance that to be done throughout the year. I don't mean renovations. Pest control, garbage. Sometimes your garbage can go right to the curb because it's close. Sometimes you have to buy a bin or pay for a bin for pickups by a larger truck. Lawn and snow. Internet. Sometimes you need that for your security as well, for your cameras, your accounting fees. Machinery rentals, that just talks about your hot water tank. Maybe you're renting your boiler, or you're leasing your boiler. And also when it comes to your elevator, there's a cost, and there's also property management. So that's all maintenance. And then we consider insurance. And of course, when you add all three together, the TMI, the 49,000 subtracted to, we're at 71,000. That's my NOI. So I want you to keep that in mind because I want to talk about cap rate, and then I want to talk a little bit about a few things before I jump into how I actually find property. So this property has an NOI, this is before the mortgage, of $71,000. Now, if I have a property cap rate, then it's really the net operating income, the NOI, divided by whatever they're asking or whatever I'm asking. So right now, I'm asking to pay 1.4 million. So you take 71,000 divided by 1.4 million, and when it's divided, it's a 5%. Now, 5% doesn't mean much to me. It's like a cookie in my mind. Cookie on its own, what are you eating it with, right? So 5% doesn't mean much unless I compare it to something else. But right now, the property is 5%. How did I get that? Net operating income divided by the asking price. Now I have to figure out cap rate the area because I have to match the property to the area and see how it's related. So right now I'm looking at the cap rate for the area, which is simply looking at history. I'm looking at a number of properties that sold in the neighborhood. Could have been a 5-block radius, could have been over a year. And this property sold and it has a cap rate of 4%. And this one here, a 10 unit, doesn't have to be the same type of unit, 4.9, and the next one below is 5.4. And you take the average of them, and that generally gives you the average cap rate for an area. You might need about 6 of those to get a better look. But for now, the area has a cap rate. My property has a cap rate. And what I have to do is say, how does my 5% compare to 4.8? Really what you want to do is buy equal to the area's cap rate or higher. I know it's hard to get that today. I get that. But I do have to teach this as the basics because ultimately an appraiser will look at this exact same way, then add it to the comps, buildings that have sold, and come with a middle ground. But either way, what I'm saying here is if 5% my property, is it equal to 4.8 or greater than 4.8? And it is, so that's good news. Okay. Now, what is my task as a real estate investor? Really, really important. My number one task is to try to buy equal to or above cap rate of the area. I might buy below, but I'm just saying that's my goal. And if 4.8% is my goal, and they're asking $1.6 million, when I divide 71 into 1.6, I see 4.4. It's lower than the area. I kind of don't want to pay that. I mean, I may have to, but I don't want to. I would prefer to pay 1.4 because 71K into 1.4 is 5%, which is better than 4.8. If that's the case, then I've saved myself $200,000, and that's something that could be exciting for my JV partner. Okay. Next one is the second task, and this one's important to consider. And don't forget, I'll give you a way to get this video so you can watch it over and over again. My role is really to increase the revenue and decrease the expense. Because if I bought it at this range, by increasing the revenue, let's say I increase the revenue and decrease the expense to about 81,000. So we went from 71 to 81. Let's say it took me 1 year to do this. What is my new value? Well, I take 81 and divide it into 4.8 because that's the area's cap rate. And right away, my property has gone up to $1.67 million, or I just picked up close to $300,000 of value by increasing my revenue, reducing my expense. I'll take a moment in about 3 seconds to show you how I do that. Okay, now that's my next goal. And my third goal is to try to justify to sell this building, not at the area cap rate, but below the area cap rate. I can justify it if the area changes to go down lower, or I can justify it if I'm able to make the building so efficient, somebody would end up paying a little bit more because of that reason. And if I can keep it at 81 NY, and I would have sold it at 3.6, which is about 1.2% less than the area, then right away I'm selling it for 2.25 million. And of course, that's an $850,000 increase. That might take 5 years to get there, but I'm just saying that's how you use the math to force appreciation. And I've done this with a number of buildings that I've owned. Bought a building for 680,000, 680, 10 years later, I sold for 1.9 million. Now, here are 3 deals that are actually, before I get to those deals, let me finish this. So cash flow is pretty much your net operating income minus your mortgage, so 71K minus 47K, and then you're at 24,000 a year, 2,000 a month, which is not bad, and your price per unit, which is important to understand. What am I paying per unit? Looking at purchase price divided by the number of units, and therefore we're at 200,000 per unit. Now, if I'm buying in Barrie, maybe I'm paying 200 to 220 per unit. If I'm buying in Kitchener, maybe I'm paying 220 to 230 per unit. If I'm buying in Guelph, maybe 250. In Waterloo, maybe 280. In Hamilton, 190,000 per unit. Every area has its own per unit averages that you generally have to analyze a whole bunch of properties to come up with that number. That's very important to consider. So just in closing this section, before I look at a few different deals with you, to show you how this is used, my net operating income has to be positive. My cap rate has to be equal to or greater than the area, if I can get that. My cash flow, I want it to be positive. I have not seen a lot of positive cash flow properties in a long time. At the same time, price per unit, I want it to be less than the area's price per unit. Now, using those 4 indicators, let me show you some current deals. So here's a 16-unit property in Belleville, and we'll use those same metrics to evaluate it together. So right now it's 2.5 million. It's purpose-built property, 2.5 stories. Right away, when I hear 2 or 3 stories or 3 stories, I'm wondering, is there an elevator? That's a cost. It's 5.8% cap rate. I know Belleville is between 5.5 and 6.3, so this is not a bad price because it's still higher than 5.5. I look at the revenue, I look at the expense, and I get the NOI by subtracting the 2. And now I see my 5.8. And how did I do that? Simply took the 144 divided into the price, and I know that I'm actually in a good range. 156,000 per unit. I happen to know that Belleville is between 130 and 160 a unit. So it's a bit high, but it's okay. And then the cash flow, 4,865 a month, is unbelievable. So I may not be crazy about the price per unit, but I like the cap rate, I like the cash flow. It's worth moving forward. If you want to look at this building, you can call me at this number. Another deal we have on the contract is a 10-unit in the Barrie area. Barrie, it's got $2.8 million is the asking. Purpose-built, it's a 4.5% cap rate. Now, right away, I know that Barrie now is between 3.6 and 4% cap rate. So the fact that it's higher makes it a good building. But look at the price per unit, $280,000 per unit is high for Barrie. Let me check this question. So you were wholesaling these properties. Yes, I was wholesaling these properties. Now keep this in mind. Every time I go to buy a property, my first activity is always to have the right to wholesale it, but I have the clause or condition to close it into a corporation, which means I'm always actively looking to buy the property. If by chance I cannot get it financed, I do not like to throw the property away. I want that deal to close on time. I want the owner to get exactly what they are looking for. So therefore, for every deal I've ever done, whether it's a house or a building, I always put a wholesale option in there, just in case I can't finance it. Instead of walking away now, I can make a small bit of profit to cover my time for having found and analyzed it and negotiated it. But what's more important is I can close it on time for that owner. So now at least they're out of the property. Sometimes I actively look for properties to wholesale, but I don't usually do that. I look for properties to buy, but I always have the right to wholesale. And again, this property is a bit high, 280, should be probably around 250, but the cash flow is good and the cap rate is good, so I'm okay with that. And then the next property, is one in Pembroke, and it's 540,000. It's 5 units and some land, and it's a 5.9% cap rate. Pembroke is between 5.6 and 6.6. So it's again mid-range. 108,000 per unit is a little bit on the high end, and the cash flow is not over 1,000. I would like it to be, but there's a piece of land here, and that's what's holding it back. With that same piece of land, you can build a 4-unit on there, and that will justify it. The important part here is not to deal so much as to see how I use the math to have that conversation with you with regards to these properties. Now, before I jump into the next section, people always ask, okay, how do you increase revenue? How do you reduce expenses? Well, let me take about a second to go through that with you. Let me just go back to this. Okay, you can raise your rents yearly. The government will tell you how much you can raise it each year. Sometimes it's 1%, sometimes it's 3%, and sometimes, like I guess last year with COVID, it was 0%. When somebody moves out on their own steam, you can always increase the rents to market rent. You can sometimes pay them 3 or 4 months, which is called cash for keys, to actually leave the property. I've only been about 20% successful with this, which means if I talk to 10 people, if I talk to 100 people, probably about 20 will even consider it. Maybe 2 might do it, or 3 might do it. But again, it's not just a quick conversation. I have a series of conversations with the person to try to figure out if they're in the right space. Like right now, you're here. Is it the same stuff or reasoning why you're here that you were 10 years ago? Did things change? Would it be better to be somewhere else? Coin laundry, storage lockers, parking spots, vending machines, building signage if you are in a good spot and the bylaw allows you to put a sign on your building, solar power, and you can also build some extra units if possible. And then just reducing the expenses, let me spend a second on that. I also want to have good tenants. And therefore, I want to stay there for a long time if they're paying good rent. Now, we all know that sometimes tenants can drive you crazy. I mean, sometimes I want to grab my pen and just go, but you can't do that. It's not best practice. So therefore, you want to have good tenants. You want to have a good relationships with them. When it comes to water usage, water has doubled for all my buildings this year, and I'm actively partnered with about 20-something buildings. What used to be $3,000 now is $4,500 to $5,000. So therefore, toilets, shower heads, dishwashers, we're very careful with that. Windows, pipes, filters. When I say vents, I mean, people tend to put like a, let's check this question. How many of these properties you find have conversion potential? I'm not sure what conversion, are you saying conversion to a condo? I find that not every building that was built in the 50s and 60s are laid out correctly for condo conversion, especially the electrical grid within the actual building itself. I would probably say if I look at 10 buildings, maybe 1, and a lot of it depends on the zoning as well. Lower repair costs I'm looking for by visiting units more often. And of course, I'm looking to do heavy duty parts on anything that moves. Doors move, heavy duty. Taps move, heavy duty. Of course, garbage recycling and utility costs, you want to keep that separate and be more responsive. Okay, so we've covered quickly how I analyze property, the 4 numbers I look at, and we use those numbers to actually look at 3 deals to have that conversation. Now, let me get more detailed into how I actually find deals. And there are a couple of ways I do that. So I'll be talking about using the census and Google search, I'll be talking about spotting clues when I look at a city, like where is it going to expand to? I'm going to match a strategy to an area. Some people walk into an area and say, I want to do BRRRR. I want to BRRRR the whole city. No, it only works in certain pockets. At the same time, I want to be a master of a certain block. So let me talk a bit about that. Now, obviously, the census for Canada right now is 2016. They should have the new census coming out soon because last year was a census year. But I will go to Canada Census, Barrie, and then see what they have to say with regards to population growth, types of dwellings that exist, also the age of the population, as well as income coming in. And I'll also just go to Google and Google things. So that's important to get a general understanding. Now, when I say clues of expansion, when I look at a city, I'll use Hamilton for an example. Number one, I look for odd shapes. So right here in the corner, this is an odd shape because there's gray all around it. No one's building there. Is there a reason for that? There's an odd shape down here. I might check that out also. Next thing I might look at is water. So around water, there's always potential. Now, Hamilton waterfront is the only waterfront that goes down in value. Everywhere else, waterfront goes up in value. But that's going to change as time goes on. I'm looking for rail. Is there any rail access? I'm looking for what's going on near to exits, on-ramps and off-ramps. These are great places for multifamily property. I'm looking for, are there any void land spaces? Like for instance, over here, why is this green? Why is this green? I'm looking to see if there's any golf courses because wealth is generally closer to golf courses. And I'm looking for any straight lines. So this gray forms a straight line down the bottom left-hand corner. So development will go next. Or over here is a straight line, development will go next. So first I'm looking for clues. Now there's probably 50 other clues, but I don't have the time to go through that with you right now, but it's part of understanding the ground. The second thing is I want to understand when things were built. Now Hamilton lays out nicely. It goes all the way down as a grid. Not every city lays out this nicely, but you still have to do this for the city that you want to focus on. Now people say to me, do I have to do this? Why not just get a realtor to do it? Yeah, you have to do it. It's like growing a thumb because you must understand it, you must develop it, and of course you can ask a realtor later. But if you're looking to talk to an investor who has a couple $1 million and you haven't done your homework on at least one city, don't have an understanding of how it works, and cannot articulate that to them correctly, you're not going to get the money. So you have to do this at least one time. For instance, Hamilton, these houses were built in the 1900s, so they're the Victorian homes. If I'm going to do renovations down here to a building or to a house, it's going to be right down to the core. I'll be pulling everything out. I'll be stripping it right down to its electrical. 1940s houses, the wartime houses, you have to dig out basements half the time. What do you want to do that? 1960s houses, you're dealing with, a different type of wiring. 1970, a different type of wiring. You're dealing with urea formaldehyde, a whole bunch of other things. 1980s, what are you dealing with? 1990s, so you can pick your pain depending on how much work you want to do by what area you actually want to work in or find buildings in. So that's important too, right? People always ask me, how do I know how old a house is? It's not stamped on the house. Well, most houses have a tree when they are made. And if you look at a tree in front of a property, if you take your head and put it right up against the tree and you measure your head, you measure the tree, it's the same size as your head. That's a 50-year-old tree. Half of that's probably a 25-year-old tree. I know some of us have bigger heads than others. But in the end, that's what you do. And I don't really mean to put your head up against the tree. I'm saying guesstimate it. Sometimes you can look at the manhole cover, not on the sidewalk, those are newer. The manhole cover on the street might have a date on it because the street's usually made when the building's made. You might pull title at land titles. You might look at the design of the building or the home, or even the cladding on the outside. Does it have siding? Like, what does it really have? Now, here's what we have to do. We have to target this stuff. Now, where is the wealthy area? So I might say that in Hamilton, let's say it's Mountain Brow. There's wealth there. Let's say somewhere in Dundas. Let's say somewhere in Ancaster. Again, this could be any city. Next is you have to identify where's the upper income. Well, this is the upper income area here. Maybe it's over here by the golf course, maybe by here, maybe it's over here. What's middle income? Okay, these are the middle income areas, downtown, uptown. What's lower middle? Well, this is lower middle probably, and this is lower middle. These older war homes, this could be lower middle. And of course, what's low income? Who knows? Maybe downtown by Barton Street is still low income. It doesn't have to be correct. I'm just giving you the examples. Now, what do you have to understand? You have to match your strategy with the area. For instance, if I'm doing wholesaling, whether it's a house or a building, I'm going to look in areas where it's low income or low middle income to get better deals. If I'm going to do buy, fix, and sell, I have to consider this. If I'm going to buy, fix, and sell, this here, this number 4 is lower middle, and number 3 is middle income. So if I were to look for a better deal that will go up in value, I should still buy it in the lower income area, just close to it, but in between this corridor here, I would carpet bomb this, because this area, the number 3, the middle income, will pull the property up, and the lower income will cause me to buy it a little bit cheaper. Okay, or this area right here, lower income will pull the property up, and of course, this one here will allow you to buy the property cheaper. So it's very important where you do what you do. If I'm doing a buy, fix, and rent, whether it's a building or if it's a house, I'm going to buy in these areas, the lower middle. At the same time, I'm going to buy closer to this point, because the gravity of the upper middle will pull the value of the lower middle up versus buying it on this side. So you have to think of what is affecting the gravity in the area of your property in order to be able to actually do some business. And just lastly, if I'm looking to do a buy, fix, refinance, whether it's a 3-unit property or if it's a building, in the end, let's say I chose this area, 1970, 1980, I'm choosing this area right now because there's a higher income area that will pull my value up. There's a Walmart right there. And now I'm picking the neighborhood. Maybe I want an older neighborhood. See ones with no portables. The schools have no portables, meaning it's a much older neighborhood. And that means the folks are probably between 65 and 75, and they're ready to retire anyway, downsize. So I may go looking for that, might get a 4-level back split. I may end up looking at a house like this with arches. Arches could be, back in the 70s, an Italian influence, which could mean there's a kitchen in the basement, okay? So of course I could just leave information under a door, and I can send some of this information to you guys if you email me. Let me just check this question. What kind of sources do you research to find such information for different areas? It's generally publicly available. To get information, there's Zillow and a whole bunch of different websites that you can go to actually look at property prices. At the same time, I do some random calling. I'll randomly call people. I may do this door knocking where people will have a conversation with me. They'll tell me exactly what they're looking for. I talk to other investors who buy in the area, and I do end up talking to certain realtors. If I do talk to a realtor, I don't want to just use their information. I want to make sure I get them paid also. So I tend not just to have realtor friends just to get information from them. I will probably do a deal through them. So at least they're like, hey, when I'm with Mathew, I'm actually making some money too. So it's really your networking that helps you to do that. Now, if I'm looking for commercial buildings, this is something really important to consider. So let's say this is Kitchener-Waterloo, and then I have the core of the city. Commercial buildings have not been really built, multifamily, since 1950 to 1965. A lot of those buildings were built back then because it's too expensive to build a multifamily building right now and actually make your money back. So where am I going to look? I'm going to look at the corridor between the core of the city and Walmart. In this case here, I'm looking at the corridor, the main road towards it. Now, Walmarts have not been around forever, so they're not going to be buildings. If Walmart came about in let's say 92, making that up, then there's no buildings around there. There's buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s, and they're going to be closer to these corridors where there is public transit. That's where you're focusing for your buildings. Now, once I have this torpedo, or this area that I'm looking at, now I'm going to do a focus on it. Let me take a second to tell you why buildings aren't being built in the multifamily realm unless it's a larger REIT who can stick around for the next 200 years. Because if you were to build a 16-unit building, let's pretend it's $6 million. Let's pretend it's $375 a unit to build. Let's say that each unit has, well, you have 16 units times, let's say your rent is $1,700 for that unit, times 12. That's $326,000 a year coming in as your gross. keep in mind that you're probably dishing out 80% for all your taxes, your maintenance, your insurance, and your mortgage. You're dishing out probably $261,000, which means your cash flow is $65,000. That building costs you $6 million. You borrowed that money. You're making $65,000 a year. If you go $6 million divided by 65,000, it'll take you 90 years to pay that off. So that's why it's better not to build a brand new building. That's why people will build a condo, and then you build for $375 a unit, let's just say, and you sell for $575 a unit, $550 a unit. You get your money back out again. And that's why condos have been built, not apartment buildings. But again, apartment buildings to be built are in vogue again by larger companies. Now, what do you do next? Next, you want to grab your little pocket. You grab that little torpedo, that little space, and you become the master of this neighborhood. Now, do you have to do it for every city? No, you don't. You have to do it for one. So you become excellent at this. You behave yourself into it, and then you'll be able to do it at a distance even easier. So I'm going to zoom in on this just using Google Earth Pro, and I'm going to take a look at the buildings, maybe even to street view, so I can actually see the building itself. Like, look at this guy under here. I thought he was a gargoyle. But either way, in fact, I've passed by this building. I have met that same guy. Either way, I'm looking at the building to see, is there a buzzer? Now, what do? I want to take notes of it because I want to own that 10-block radius. I want to make sure that I know everything that's going on in this 10-block radius. And therefore, if I'm going to the grocery, I may do a detour and check out the neighborhood. If I'm driving to work and I'm 30 minutes early, I may do a detour, check out the neighborhood. If I'm busy, if I'm free on Saturday, I may check the neighborhood out. Okay, so I'm going to now write about the neighborhood. I'm going to say, well, this building is 97 Main Street. It's multifamily. This one's a plaza. This one's a mixed use. 5-level, 42 unit. The class is 1, and P could be the condition, poor. So you make your codes for it so that you begin to know your neighborhood, and then you have these methods of contacting people. Sure, you can go door to door. You can buzz the buzzer and talk to the superintendent and ask them if they will take a letter that will go to the owner. Now, as a building owner, my super has to give me all letters sent to me because I'm not going to let my super make a decision on whether I buy or sell the property. Now, I do not go to properties that are for sale. I go to any property that I want, which means I make my deal. I'm not looking for just distressed properties, by the way, because distressed properties sometimes have distressed owners. I just look at the properties that I want and I make my deal. So I might talk to the super, or I might buzz, and sometimes it directly goes to the owner, talk to them. Might look at a sign and see a phone number on there, call that phone number. Might be the owner, might be a property manager. Then I say, can I have my information sent to the owner? I don't ask for the owner's information. I ask my information to be sent to the owner, and then I follow up with them. You can pull up old ads from properties. You can look at property management companies and see if they're managing certain companies or properties that you like. You can leave a letter for them to actually call you, and maybe somebody might call you. Now, there is a program for around $4,000, another one for $8,000. I'm not going to give you those names on an open source. That's better than Geo Warehouse and Purview because they actually give you the owner's numbers. And 60% of the time, those numbers are still active. So again, I'm not going to broadcast that on this screen. If you're a serious investor and we have a conversation, that's something that I might share with you, but I do not want to get that out there to the general public. Now, so we've covered how I find my deals. Now let's talk about how I talk to owners. And in doing this, what I'm going to do is show you my system of the process that I use. My job when I talk to building owners is to build a database of the ones who are looking to take over assignments, the ones who are looking to JV, the ones who are looking to lend. If I don't have one looking to sell, I'm going to try to at least get someone who's going to assign something in the future, someone who's going to partner with me, someone's going to lend to me. And the script goes this way. I just say, hi, do you want to sell your building? No, I don't. And I'll give you guys a quick 3-minute actual phone call just as soon as I finish the screen. They might say, no, I don't. Do you have any other buildings? They might say, no, they don't. I'll say, well, you know what? Are you still growing? If they say, yes, they are, I might say, well, can I ask you a question? I do come across owners time to time, just like you, and sometimes they do want to sell their buildings, and sometimes I can't buy that building once I've put it on the contract and once I've looked at the financing, it's not working out for me. But if I showed it to you for your review and selection, would it be something you're interested in seeing? If they say yes, then I ask them what area, what type of property you're looking for. Tell me a bit about your interest. So I'm not actively looking for property for these guys. I'm actually looking for a property for myself. I'm putting a contract and an offer on a building for myself, but I have the right to assign. And if I can't finance that building, or I can't find a JV partner, I may assign the building to them. That's important because you don't want to act as a broker without a license. I personally am on the deal. And if they say, no, they're not growing, I might say, well, do you ever consider joint venturing? I might say it a little bit differently. I might say, you're somebody who is ahead of where I am. And let me ask you a question. Do you ever lose the drive to invest in real estate as you get older? And most times they say no. And I say, well, how come you're not investing? Well, I'm too tired. I'm too old. I tell them, well, I can be your arms and legs. I'm still young. Well, I'm actually not still young. I'm almost 60. But, if you're out there and you're young, you can always say, well, I'm still young. My arms and legs are still working. If you want to have that dream, I can still do that with you. And then they can become a potential JV partner. And sometimes they'll say to me, well, I'm not interested in buying another building. I might say to them, well, if you want to stay in the real estate world, have you thought of lending money? Because obviously that's a way to make money, almost like an annuity. So I may take them that way. Lastly, if they do say yes, they want to sell, I'll say to them, they'll ask me, what's the price right away? I'm going to tell them, well, I don't give the price right away. I have to figure it out. I look at your upgrades, look at the area, what's good for you, what's going on in the area, what you've done. I look at the NOI, I look at the comps, I put it into my spreadsheet, I then come back with a price for you. We agree upon the offer information. We discuss the clauses that are going in. I give you that offer. We then go through the process of, getting it all legal, deposits in, and then I do my review now of all the data you give me. And from there, I may come back and say the bank is not going to accept that price. I may want a lower price, who knows? And then at the end, I might decide, is this something for me to actually buy, or something to assign, or something to joint venture with and buy? So that's generally how I do that process. Now, this little section here will take about 3 minutes, and it's going to be a phone call just to an owner, and I just recorded it. And again, I got permission from him to actually present this, got the permission after the fact. Now, as I'm going through the call, I'm going to be circling certain things on the screen. Whenever I say segue is a way to keep the call going. I'm joining a goodbye more to a let's keep going. And you'll notice that I do certain things. I'm fully transparent. If I give my first and last name, that's coming with open hands. I respect his time value. I surrender by saying, I love your property. I surrender, as opposed to trying to be a heavy negotiator at the start of the bridge. You don't negotiate from the start, you negotiate as you go across the bridge. Then when I ask the question, I just stay silent. And then with this guy, he's an accountant, so I did a low key chat with him. So let me go ahead and play this for you. Hope you can hear it. And then I'll circle what I'm doing as I'm doing it.
Well, hi, it's Mathew Frederick. I'm trying to connect with. I want to speak to him about 1 in Hamilton.
Okay, hold on.
Thank you.
Ron speaking.
Hi, it's Mathew Frederick. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Listen, I know you're busy. I was in Hamilton, and I was out front one buildings, and they're beautiful. And I want to buy them.
Oh, are you the investor or you are the agent?
No, I'm an investor. And what I do is I drive through the city. I look for just the best property, and then I find the owner, and I ask them, are you interested in selling? And if they are, I make them an offer that is a fair one for them. And
now notice how I'm low key. I'm only low key with him because he's more of he's an analyzer. He's more of an accountant. If he was bolder, I would be different. If he was more friendlier, I'd be different. If he was more of a person who was shy, I would be a little bit different. So the chat all depends on what am I saying to the person.
And then I buy it.
Yeah. Well, I think right now we're not in that property is not on our book to sell actually. We want to keep the property for a while right now.
And this is where everybody stops. You just say, okay, well, thank you very much. Have a good day.
But I really appreciate your interest in that.
Yeah, so you know what? Why don't I give you my name and number just so you have that anyway? Do you have a pen handy?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Mathew with 1 T, so M.
Now, the reason why I'm going to spell this out nice and slow is because I'm leading him to do something. He's writing as I'm leading, and I'm slowing down the whole process. And I'm teaching him to follow my instruction.
ATHEW. My last name is Frederick, Frederick. and my number is 289-440-2335. How about you? Are you into a lot of multifamily, or do you build
Yeah,
a
we
home?
are just an investor. It's just our, I would say, hobby. We are not we are not like a builder or something. We are just investors.
Well, for a hobby, you picked the right building, so you must have a lot of experience then.
Well, when you want to look for your retirement, then sometimes your hobby comes in your dream also, apart from your work. So you work hard to make sure when you get old, you have something to give you some money in the later on, right?
Yes, because a lot of people just buy because it looks good. You bought in the right area.
Yeah.
So do you have other buildings too, or this is the only one you guys have?
No, we have a couple of more in house, and we have one on also. So I think
3. Is that one for retirement also, or is that one of those little donkeys you're going to sell in the future?
we might be actually. If we have a good offer, I can convince someone actually, my spouse actually to sell that property. 8 units, again, very solid build, very solid. These buildings are very solid build.
What I generally do, I won't keep you on the phone because I know you're at work. What I generally
So see how, okay, now I could have walked away from this conversation a long time ago, but I stayed with it. I had my segues, and I'm able to find out he's got another building. And now I'm going to show him a little bit of leadership by telling him, here's what we'll do
just
next.
look at the area, look at what's in the building. I also look at a little bit of math as well, and I bring all 3 together, and then I come up with a number, and then I talk to the owners, and if they find it to be a fair number, because for me, I only do fair business, because I might do business with you again in the future.
Perfect.
I'll give you a call on that, and we'll go from there.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you for your time,
Thank you. Thank you.
and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so that's a simple conversation that could have stopped in about 1 minute, or it went on to about 2 or 3 minutes. And ultimately, I'm in the driver's chair being able to put an offer in on that deal. So that's just a quick example. I know we only have an hour, so I can't spend a lot of time on that stuff with you, but hopefully that gives you an example of, it's not just a simple phone call. There's thinking throughout the whole process to keep that person on the phone in order to see if there's something else that can be done. I could have gone on to say, well, have you ever thought of joint venturing? Okay, let's talk a bit about the JV structure, just really briefly. And what that is, it's a building. And of course, we have an investor who's an expert, the active investor, who brings the experience, the management, and the time. The down payment, the mortgage, and the closing costs comes from the passive investor. And of course, we split the cash flow 50-50. That's all common sense. But why would somebody actually put the money in and still give you 50% of everything? Again, I live this with all my other businesses. I'm the one putting the money in. I have the freedom so that I don't have to have any time commitment in those businesses. And for them, it's important maybe not to be here dealing with the building and the building issues. It's like raising a kid, right? They probably have a work-home life balance that's not, let's say, correct. And now to take on a building on their own, they can put 100% of the money in and be 100% owner, but then deal with 100% of the problems and get 100% of the income, but they might 100% lose their spouse. Okay, work full-time at their job while I'm busy doing this. And of course, I have the expertise, they don't have to, and I have a vested interest. I only make money when there is positive cash flow, when the property goes up in value. I'm gonna go extend it for an extra 5 minutes, if you don't mind. I know some of you have to go, but I just wanna talk about how the property's held, and then pretty much what I would say to a doctor, and then we're almost finished up. So how's the property held when you have a JV partner? Well, whoever's on the bank is the person who puts the down payment, puts the closing costs, and puts the mortgage. So that venturer, the passive investor, they're on the bank mortgage, and they're also on land titles, because who's on the mortgage is also on the deed itself. So how do I get control? Well, the joint venture agreement, which we call a co-venture agreement, gives me, the active partner, some control through this agreement. Now, this is a 30-page agreement. It's not a one-page agreement. It's 30 pages. And it's going to state something as simple as this in one of the clauses. The venturer, which is the passive investor, person who's putting the money down, not doing the work, on title, agrees to act as trustee. Now, they're a trustee, and as legal owner, because they are a legal owner, they're on the bank and the title, their legal owner trustee has agreed to do what? Hold the property in trust for the benefit of who? The finder, in their proportionate shares. 50-50, 60-40, 70-30. And of course, the agreement's going to define how that all works. Now, I need to just spend a few minutes with you on how I talk to a high net worth person like a doctor. Now, why do I talk to doctors? Well, I don't just talk to doctors. I talk to, from 1 to 10, investment bankers to physicians, orthodontists to lawyers to pharmacists. But what do I talk to these people? I can always talk to somebody to be my JV partner, someone who is at my, let's say, brand new level, if I'm a new investor, and they always need their money back right away. They need the money to turn over right away. There's always a pressure there. Or I can meet and mix shoulders with people at a higher stature in their financial life. And therefore, they don't need the money back, but they do have a need. And their need is, their job is performance-based. If the doctor doesn't work, the doctor doesn't get paid. Lawyers are overworked, and so are doctors, and they're stressed out. And most of them have a work-life balance issue, that if they were to work any more, they would lose what they have at home. And that's the issue. That's their problem. And what I want to do is not get them real estate. I want to solve that problem that they have. And I can solve that problem using real estate. So here's the conversation I generally have with them. And sorry, I'm going to go through this very quickly. But if I'm talking to a doctor, or if I'm talking to a lawyer, if I'm talking to a pilot, there's a different conversation to have with each one. But I want to give you the one for a doctor, just to give you the mindset I'm talking about. When I talk to the doctor, I say to them, here's the reality for you. Your bachelor's degree cost you 6,400 hours. Your medical degree cost you additional 15,000 hours. And your residency was 20,000 hours. So you put in 41,000 hours to be a doctor. That's a 10-year job right there. And that 10-year job of learning was not an easy job. That was like a 20-year job. The 10 years you took to learn was like a 20-year job. It is that hard. And it cost you money too. How much did it cost? I'm not really sure. I tell them on average, as a doctor, you're working 59.6 hours a week. And that's 1.5 times harder than the most average people who work a 40-hour week. And if the average salary for a doctor, according to this same website, is $208,000, here's your reality, I tell them. At 19, you made a decision to become a doctor. At 29, you became a doctor. You put in 10 hours of work to get all this. And on top of it all, that 10 was like 20 hours. You're going to work till 67. You're going to put 38 years in. But in 38 years, you're going to end up working 1.5 times more than anybody else. That's 57 hours, plus the 10 years it took you to become a doctor. That's 67 years, 57 years, plus 10, 67 years. And really, in what? 38 years. You worked 67 years in 38 years. What does that do to a person when you work twice as much as anybody else? Well, here's what I can do. I can't reduce your workload for the next 10 years, but I can create an extra $1 million in that time period with no extra work from you, if you are interested. And they'll say, well, how do you do that? I go, well, I don't duplicate you. You're not able to be duplicated because obviously you're great, but I can create mini yous, mini small yous. What do you mean? They say. I say, well, buildings. A building is a mini you. It's not you, but it can work 24 hours a day. And if these buildings generate cash flow every year of $36,000, you don't want that money. You don't need that money. I need the $36,000. But what you will like, because by the way, to add that to your pay is not really going to help you. You're going to push you up a little bit higher. But what will happen over the next 10 years is the buildings will go up 6 to 8% a year. And if we buy one building and maybe one in a couple more years and a couple more years, that's going to be about $1 million worth of equity in those buildings. I take the cash flow. I need the $36,000 a year. You get the appreciation. And that's generally the conversation that I have with them. And again, that generally works with them. And just lastly, you can't just tell somebody, hey, you know what, give me all the money, and all of a sudden I'll take 50%. They think that the money is everything, and you're fighting it is nothing. So you have to behave them into understanding that slowly but surely, we want to move this pendulum to equilibrium. And how you do that is simply by showing them, behaving them, saying, let me show you my marketing research. You spend time with them, they realize how important you are. That 90-10 now becomes 80-20. Then you show them your data analysis. And then you show them your purchase offer and how you do things, all the causes and conditions that you put in there. You then show them how you deal with tenants. Now, I'm not just telling them, I'm showing them, I'm sitting with them, I'm spending time with them and behaving them to realize that I am trustworthy and I'm worth that time. And every single time you teach them something, it moves this pendulum down to once they get past the due diligence, the repairs, the management, and the marketing, all of a sudden you're at 50-50. And sometimes they feel as though they should be giving you 70 and they're taking 30. Because I guarantee you this, every building that I've joint ventured with, and I have about 25 joint ventures, at no time do I believe that the money that they put in actually compensated me for all the time I put into it. So that's something that you really have to consider. So I know it's 1 hour and we're through this, but I hopefully you had a chance to get a better understanding of what multifamily is. And today it's really for you to get to know me a little bit better, and then we can follow up on your specific situation with a phone call or with an email, and then we can go from there. Okay, great stuff, Mathew. Oh, well, thank you very much. Now, I do have something called the video library that I've spent this entire year. I spent 2021, instead of sitting back on the sofa eating pie, watching TV, I decided to create a mini me, a teaching system that it's about 31 years in the making, but it took me a year to make. And it's about 100 videos, like 50 hours of instruction, 50 audios of me talking to people on the phone, like 10 hours of talking to owners, and a whole bunch of pages. Let me just check this. Thank you. Very welcome. About 70 documents that I use and a 90-day challenge. And it covers a whole bunch of topics: strategies, fundamentals, networking, how to find an investor, essential techniques, advanced techniques, land development, and self-storage. It's not cheap, it's expensive, but what is expensive? In other words, it's about $4,000. If you want to take a look at it, it's rccsol.com/videos. Consider that, and I think it'll be great. Again, it's almost a love letter writing to investors of how I look at things and how I've looked at things over the last 30 years. My ups, my downs, the insides and outsides of investing. Okay, let's take a second and see if there are any questions. Thank you so much for all this, Mathew. How can I access your video recording later? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this on the, I'm going to put this right here. It'll be at rccsol.com/videos. I'm going to save this, and then tomorrow morning I'll pop it on there. Just go on there and you can actually see this video, so you can slow it down and watch it again. I don't see any more questions. So again, thank you everybody for spending some time with me. So much valuable insight here. Thank you. Good stuff. What kind of sources? I think I've answered the questions. And again, if you have any other questions, write them all down. Have a great time. Have a great night. And I appreciate that you were here to listen to this. Lastly, right now there's about 1,000 members in this meetup group. And we actively have about 250 members who are actively looking at things back and forth. Next week, I have a presentation on how to upscale. And I think moving forward, we'll probably do some outdoor get-togethers. Might get a little cold. And then once things blow over with COVID, maybe we'll do some more indoor get-togethers. I think this meetup group is going to be interesting. It's got a lot of great people. Like to get to know everybody. I think it's going to be pretty good. It's more of a tactile, hands-on meetup group as opposed to going into a hotel and just doing, let's say, events. But we'll do both. Okay. Thank you very much. God bless, and we will talk again soon. Don't forget to email me, and I'll make sure I get answers out to you guys. And I'll get this recording up by tomorrow morning. Thanks again.